All right. So another edition of Unbossing Leadership LinkedIn Live event today with my beautiful, wonderful, very experienced guest, Andrea Dennis from Chicago. Welcome. I'm just going to say a few words about you because I prepared some of them. And of course, then I will leave it up to you to introduce yourself. So just to give again to our audience today some context, what we're doing is we're giving some ideas and some concrete practices about what works and what also gets in the way around self-management in organizations. And we have very interesting speakers, practitioners from Spain today, from the United States, and we're connected through the platform of the Corporate Rebels from Holland and all the beautiful practices and case studies that they have been collecting and making available to practitioners like us. So this is for CEOs, for leaders, for practitioners, coaches, trainers, facilitators, internal and external facilitators, of course, so that we can all together keep this movement growing so that it becomes more and more the status quo. Unbossing leadership, self-managed organizations where we decentralize leadership and we put humans at the center of everything. So today I'm joined by someone whose courage and clarity and commitment to real change embodies the spirit of unbossing leadership, if I might say so. So Andrea is a transformation catalyst at Earthshot Labs, a climate tech startup that dared to shift from hierarchy to an autonomous team network without any external consultants, big budgets, or any safety net. She combines deep insight with real-world experimentation that she's going to share with us today. And her story is not only bold, it's brutally honest, I find. Andrea, I'm so glad you're here. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you to everybody who's in this broader movement. It's not easy, but it's the future of work. And I'm so glad we have spaces like this to share the nitty-gritty, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And it's a pleasure to be here. I'll just give you a brief background about who I am and how I got here. So my background has always been rooted in the bridges of systems around work and dignity, justice, and climate. My parents were the union leaders of their teachers' union. I spent the first decade of my career focused on social transformation through cultural exchange, fair trade, and environmental education in the city of big shoulders. That's the city of Chicago, which has a very storied labor movement history. It's where May Day started, actually, which is no longer celebrated as May Day in the United States. But May Day started in Chicago, the 40-hour work week, and a lot of people pushed to have dignity and jobs in the city of Chicago. And I've been shaped by that history deeply and by the fair trade movement of what does it mean to really be in partnership and have the dignity of a job. While going through that labor movement education, I also got the education of bringing consciousness into the workplace through reinventing organizations and other teal principles around purpose. And that has really shaped me and led me to my position now at Earthshot Labs, which gave me a wonderful opportunity to help shape a climate tech company that had the values, had the interest, and didn't really know how to practically apply that work. So that's what I've been doing since I started at Earthshot Labs, and that's what I'm here to talk to you about today.
Yeah, thank you so much. Fantastic. And so what actually kicked this off and made me think I should invite you and help us all learn from you more was a really fantastic testimonial that you wrote and published on the Corporate Rebel community page. And I remember reading that it was actually the team that initiated this transformation themselves. And I'm just wondering, how did that kind of all start, if you can share with us? And also, what role did the CEO have in that from the beginning until now, so to speak?
Yeah, so we had some phases, some transformational phases at Earthshot. I'll say that the first part was that the co-founders were both really interested in teal organizations and kind of doing what was right, what was heart-centered, what felt like the most intuitive, common sense way to bring a business together. And they've always encouraged that, but it hasn't been easy along the way, because at the same time there was this commitment to culture and then this necessity to be a sustainable, financially sound business. And at times at the beginning stage, those seemed in conflict with each other. We had some people on the team that I would call culture purists. We needed to pay everybody the exact same amount, you know, a no firing policy, and then we had to hire new people and hire a bigger engineer who needed to support his family in San Francisco and couldn't be paid that amount and couldn't join the team. And so immediately we had to, you know, break that rule we had set for ourselves, which created some tension right off the bat in terms of what our DNA was and how we wanted to be flexible with our practices, but also committed to our values. And I think that the CEO and the co-founder has always tried to manage that tension. And so what we did initially was this kind of, I'll say, like a free-for-all phase where each team sort of developed their subculture. And so we had some teams that were completely flat and some teams that had, you know, former McKinsey consultants and had a pretty traditional hierarchy. And it kind of worked, but what happened was we went through a really challenging time. The entire venture capital community went through a challenging time, and climate tech in our work of reforestation and conservation. And so we pared down the team and we sort of had this rebirth. And in the rebirth, it was like, who are we? You know, what is the DNA of Earthshot? And that's where I really leaned into the corporate rebels community and explored the models of progressive companies. I took the master class. It was the most fascinating cohort I did all my homework and then some. It was like extra credit I needed to learn. And in that, I'll call phase 2 of phase 1, free for all, phase 2, research and possibility. I was able to host workshops, bring in light touch initiatives within the organization, and then presented a roadmap to the team at our team retreat of like, this is what it looks like to be a progressive company fully. And this is what it could mean for us. And it's up to us if we want to do it. And along the way, had been laying the groundwork kind of simultaneously. I'll call phase 3 laying the groundwork with the CEO and the other senior leader, our chief science officer, and the entire team doing surveys. And during that phase, we really drafted and defined our long-term vision that was simple, magnetic. This is who we are. This is our purpose. And at the same time, establish guiding principles and norms around what behaviors are rewarded at Earthshot and what are not. And it's interesting because I just read 𝗵𝗵𝗆 Gill of the Tufts Leadership Institute. She just posted a blog 3 days ago. And it was about, is self-management for everyone? And there's this conversation about, is it inclusive? And I think that just like traditional hierarchy isn't for everyone, self-management is challenging and might not be for everyone. Some people like to just be told what to do, come in, do their work, clock in, clock out. And we realized that that kind of, that orientation toward work, it doesn't work for Earthshot. And we just had to be very clear about that. And so that was a process we went through during laying this groundwork phase and becoming unapologetic about who we are and who we aren't, so people can opt in and out. And then we also had to rework our compensation rubric. It was I can't stress this enough, that the compensation rubric has to be fair. it has to be transparent, and it has to be aligned with principles. As soon as we start introducing privilege to a few people and not others in either how we reward compensation, time off, any type of privilege, what hotels they could stay at versus other people, it completely erodes any other facet of being self-managed or an autonomous network of teams. So that was kind of like everything we had to do initially before we started, I'll call the fourth phase of implementation and testing, which is what we're in now. And that's where we really collapsed middle management. We introduced a new structure of coordinators, representatives, a steering team, facilitators, and note takers. We introduced the collective bonus model. We said, no, we're not doing individual bonuses, which was an ongoing conversation with our CEO because he had a business sales mentor who's still there. Hi, Andy. I know you mean well and you're trying to get us in a good place. But that, like, there's no other way to do it other than individual bonuses. And so we just had that continual back and forth and landed on a collective bonus structure for our team. And then, so we introduced the new structure, the collective bonus model, coaching and accountability process at our organization, and then a new meeting and business cadence for how we work around the calendar year. And that's all still evolving. We're still defining leadership practices. We're still working on our feedback culture and many other things. But I would say that's the phase we're in right now.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you so much for breaking that down for us into these phases. Just to kind of dig a little bit deeper and zoom into one of the principles that you've highlighted, can you tell us a little bit more about why it's so crucial to stay away from the individual bonuses and go to the collective and the team ones? What have you seen it do, to the team and everything when it gets in the way? Can you describe that and maybe give us some examples? For one, what's the individual one, and how does it impact then when you move to the other one, to the collective one?
Well, even in the recruiting of candidates for our sales team, there was tension from existing BD, business development folks, and new people coming on. Okay, are they going to get a structure that we didn't have? And then therefore, all the work we've done up until now, is that going to be rewarded? And then that created gatekeeping around even onboarding and the success of somebody making their deals. And so the tension was there even in the hiring process. And then the tension became, okay, who owns accounts? Because a lot of people have worked on different accounts. And so you could already feel this low level, and we have a very lovely team. Let me just say that. These are people who could be making a lot more money in a different environment. They could be on the other side working for companies that might be doing more environmental destruction than environmental restoration. And they are choosing to work here and work really hard. So, but it got in the way. It started undermining this spirit of collaboration, and in a very kind of subtle but clear way. And so that was, and then it became, okay, who gets what? And that was where the energy and the focus was going, rather than what partnerships are we building? How can we help each other? What skill do you have that I don't have that you could teach me, even if it's not 100% within your goal structure or within your role description? And so that was sort of the transition. As soon as we said, actually, we're not going to be doing this, it opened up a whole new ethos on the team and from the team at large, because it takes a lot of technical people to put together the proposals we're doing for reforestation and conservation. They're massive. These proposals, even before we get the job, need a lot of insight from the group. So now we have scientists leaning in enforcers, compliance experts, and project leads who are all helping shape these proposals, knowing that this is going to be collectively rewarded across the team. Whereas before, there was also this tension of like, we have a lot of work to do, and now BD, business development, is coming to us with another last minute proposal. But, you know, it's last minute because this is when the client needs it, not because of anything that they're doing. So it just really shifted the mentality of the company to move together in a direction. And then, of course, Troy, the CEO, was still chatting with Andy and about like, okay, well, this is going to not work eventually. So we're going to need these individual commission structures. And then it's like the universe provided. We work with a bank called Mercury, and Troy, our CEO, was having another conversation with maybe a banker or someone else and said, oh, well, I just saw that Mercury also doesn't do individual bonuses. And here's a bank, you know, that's not doing it. And so sometimes you also need to bring in other people to speak for the cause. And luckily there was a podcast and a blog. And so that kind of put us over the edge of really being like, this is who we are and this is how we want to do business.
Fantastic. I think that's very enlightening to say, you know, as the universe provided, but that's kind of a strategy to use and say, bring in others so that we validate the concept. It is doable. It makes sense. It is the future. So I could go so many places already, but I'm just kind of wanting also to meet our audience, kind of like you started out, you took the Corporate Rebels Masterclass. It gave you a lot of case studies, and you could get probably a lot of your questions answered, and you learned a lot about the, I'm supposing, because I haven't taken it yet, you know, the tools, let's say decision making that you do, all these new tools from Sociocracy, for example. And then you kind of found your way through, and I understand you didn't really have a consultant or a mentor or somebody by your side. And then you did, and I took this down, that you gave a roadmap at a retreat, and you said, this is what it looks like to be a progressive organization. Help us understand how you came to develop that, because you did that on your own. So help us understand, you know, how did that go for you? What helped you? What got in the way? What would you do differently if you had to do it again?
Okay, well, I knew that at some point I was going to need to synthesize everything that I was learning from Corporate Rebels and just be a vessel to bring it to the team. And I was keeping that in mind the entire time I was doing the cohort. And luckily, they really structure the cohort around how can you take each piece that you're learning and apply it to whatever business or consulting effort you're doing. So that's kind of how they guide it. But there was a core piece that I felt was missing from Corporate Rebels, and that was just kind of about the heart and the DNA of the culture itself. And I mean, in some instances, I remember there are progressive companies out there that don't even use the term culture. You know, they're like, oh, that's just how we do business. So it's not like there's a specific kind of roadmap for this is the culture of a company. So I started doing in tandem a lot of research on culture and really how people think, act, and behave at a company. That's kind of where I landed in terms of like defining culture for myself and Earthshot, and found different resources and then combined that with kind of the hardware, the structure, the format presented in Corporate Rebels with the sort of underlying culture piece. And that is the roadmap that I created. And from there, I shared this is the roadmap, and then I broke it down per kind of module in the roadmap with the team. And I assumed we'd have like all of this year, all of 2025, to unpack each module, like a module a month or something. And it was like right after I gave this presentation in 2024, they're like, okay, we want to do this tomorrow. We want to make all of this happen. And I was like, okay. And so here's, so we jumped right in, and there are some things I would do differently that I'm happy to share with you now based upon all of that learning. And the first is that I would have held a formal vote or a commitment moment like 𝗃 does, which is a company in Europe that buys businesses and gives them the opportunity to transition to be self-managed. I think it's like they need 80% of the
That's right.
team to vote. And I wish I would have done that just as like, this is the moment. I think it's really important to name thresholds at a company. And because even though I got overwhelming support and people wanted it, I would have liked to have been able to say, okay, this was the moment. So I would have suggested, even if it wasn't like a formal vote, just some threshold. And then I would have started with the 𝗔𝗱𝗱 model of the psychology of change within organizations to emotionally and mentally prepare the team for what it means to go through change. And I mentioned that 𝗬𝗎 Gill blog that she just posted is self-management for everyone. And she says a lot of people give up after 6 months. And in her research, it can take up to 2 years to really solidify the structure of self-management. And so I think that everybody thought that the transition would just be very quick and effortless and people would just love it. And I think that it's a change like any change. So I would have started off with more of that psychological understanding of organizational change. And I would also pair every rollout of like everything I rolled out with a training to ensure there's alignment and adoption. I think that that's just important in small trainings where people can do role plays and really lean on facilitation, which I have because that's my background. But I would just go the extra effort of creating that training module. And then the last piece would just be continuing to link the culture transformation to the business strategy. And that because when I mentioned phase 1 and it was kind of a free for all, at sometimes there felt like there was a tension between the culture and the business strategy. I don't think that exists now, but I think that the case for any kind of culture transformation, in my opinion, has to speak to the business strategy, and both philosophically and strategically in terms of achieving our goals and our mission. And so continue to kind of strengthen that narrative and, what that means in practice. Those are some key insights I'd apply again if I was starting over.
Yeah, wonderful, wonderful. And the last one that you mentioned around the alignment between the culture transformation and the business speaks to me, I don't know if you agree, to the fact that we can get excited about the idea of self-management because it seems when you dig deeper to make so much sense, common sense, and it's really shown in so many cases that it's not just increasing quality for employees, the culture, etc., but really bottom line, it's really an interesting concept just from that lens for business. But if we don't have a clear vision and we are not really purpose aligned, so to speak, so that we have something that we really believe in, so that self-management is a means to an end in a way, it's not the end, then sometimes that alignment can lead to friction, I suppose.
Yes, it can. And we can get kind of lost in what we're trying to figure out and where we're trying to go. And so I think a lot of it is just continuing to like orient of here's where this is the problem we're trying to solve and why, and how it relates to the business. And what I really liked about Corporate Rebels is a lot of their work is being close to the client. And I think in the previous, phase 1 of the free for all, it was like be close to the culture, and we were kind of missing our relationship with the client. And so I loved and appreciated that orientation in Corporate Rebels, and brought that in our transformation and want to continue to hone that.
Wonderful. Yeah, and how about we go to that interesting example that you mentioned in your testimonial that, at some point, actually, I think it was just a couple of weeks after the transformation was announced, that one key player, a key scientist, decided to leave, and then something else happened. Would you share with us a little bit about that, just as an example, also to encourage people to not give up even when things like that happen?
Yes, this is a shot to the heart. So these changes are hard, and unforeseen challenges will arise all the time. And we had a big one right away, shortly after we had this kind of pivotal moment where we wanted to go all in on being a progressive company, and we restructured to our autonomous network of teams and rolled out the collective bonus. And here's how the different roles. One of our most trusted scientists came to us and said that they were going to leave and go to another big player in the space, and reason being that they needed traditional leadership guardrails. They needed the title, they needed the role to be able to grow, and that wasn't going to be the case at Earthshot. And then we were like, no, and I did my very best at like, okay, here's some leadership training. Let's enroll you here. This is all the different, we thought maybe you could take on these other roles, the coordinator, the rep role, we really tried our best to situate this person so that they wouldn't leave. And they were just very clear that this is what they needed to do, and that they didn't think that this new structure would give them the tools that they needed. So that was a big hit to the team, the morale. We were already going through, the growing pains of this, especially some people transitioning out of more of a managerial role and kind of grappling with what their responsibilities were at the company. So it was a delicate moment. And then this person leaving was gave people a lot of doubts.
Yeah.
And then it gave me a lot of insights, because this person, upon their exit, was like, and another thing. And I hadn't heard feedback from this person. It was like, people are talking too long in meetings about things they don't know about, and it's taking up too much time. Nobody's taking charge on certain things. It was like kind of this waterfall moment for them to really speak up, which are things they hadn't said. So I was taking notes, and I'm like, okay, this is the direction I need to offer the team. This is the coaching we need to bring in. So they left. We took their feedback. We implemented it. We listened. We didn't collapse into all of that kind of potential demoralization. We just kept going. And then months later, so this was like 4 months later, I get an email from the scientist who said, I get it. I've learned the philosophy that you've talked about in terms of hierarchy and intrinsic value of leading finally makes sense to me. And would there be space for me to come back to Earthshot? And the rest of the team was like, hallelujah, yes, under any circumstance, we'll make it happen. And this person is now back, and we're so excited because they've been really taking advantage of a lot of different opportunities to lead. And I would say it's not like a fairy tale ending. We're still working through things, because in a way, at the other organization, it's like people had less meetings, people had more time to do things, people could really just kind of heads down and not have to worry about other problems. And so I think we're still shifting and trying to make things as streamlined as possible for us to go fast. but we learned a lot, and we're so happy to have them back.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah. So it sounds like when this person announced that they needed something else to grow, what kind of came up from me was you can understand this word grow in different ways, right? You can say, oh, I want to grow. And then obviously you would want to offer trainings, possibilities for them to expand their leadership skills. But maybe what she meant also included growing in terms of hierarchy and climbing the ladder. And you were taking that away, right? So they didn't really see how they can have a successful or fulfilling career without increasing the status, right?
Yes. Yep. That's exactly it. And then that's something we're grappling with now, is because that is just a conditioned mindset of traditional hierarchy. And so people have been at Earthshot, 2-3 years, and they wonder, what does this look like on my resume? How does this translate to being paid more and taking on more responsibility? And what I've learned about kind of role transitions and taking on more responsibility in this structure, which we didn't talk too much about in the Corporate Rebels, but I've found some other resources, is that process can be somewhat of a negotiation, a messy process. Say someone wants to take on more responsibility, but then who's going to do the responsibility they've been doing? And so we've created a role transition process at Earthshot that's been really, I think, quite successful, because it is a negotiation between what does the company need and what is the person who's like really listening to the needs and understands how they want to grow, how they can move into a new space. And I really like the term that comes out of Radical Candor, the terms of a rock star and a superstar. So somebody who's really good at what they do, they're a rock star. They just want to be the expert in what they do. And then how do we reward that in our compensation structure, versus a superstar who wants to take on a lot of different responsibilities, solving problems cross-functionally and things like that. And, what does that mean for leadership? Is leadership in both being a rock star and a superstar? And so I would say this is a phase we're really growing into right now in this implementation and test phase that we need to figure out, so that people don't think they need to leave and just go climb a corporate ladder for status, and to grow.
Okay, yeah. So I'm hearing that it's something that, even though it's presented and you might be shocked at first as an employee to say, oh my God, all my hopes and dreams and how I envisioned my future are all gone, I need to leave. Actually, the invitation is to say, well, if you stay, you get to shape how we're going to meet your needs, but we need to do that in a dialogue with you, because that's how we do things here from now on.
Exactly. It is all about the conversation and listening. And I think when those two things meet, when you feel the need of the company and where we're going, and listen to the problems that we're trying to solve, and then understanding, oh, I have an impetus to want to try and solve these problems and move in that direction. To me, when that comes together, that is the most gratifying professional experience that we can have. And not to be a little bit spicy, but there was this woman, Barbara Marx Hubbard, who's an evolutionary theorist. She would call that vocational arousal. And I think that you can really be in an energetic state of like positive reinforcement, because you are solving problems you're really interested in solving, that the team really needs you to solve. And that changes a lot. And so that's what I love about this autonomous network of teams, is that we're not locking ourselves into one static role description. But at the same time, we have to be clear about what our roles and responsibilities are as they change. Because coming from, like, I'm the people and culture person, so I'm, technically in the HR area, and there's always conflict issues, and it inevitably almost comes down to clarity on roles and responsibilities. So the level of dialogue and communication really needs to be at a high quality. And that's something about working at Earthshot. You can't work in silos. You have to be collaborative. You have to be you have to have strong communication skills in order to excel in this environment, because things are changing and things need to be articulated across the board. But it's quick. There's not a lot of bureaucracy, and when we're in flow, it happens, and it feels really good and exciting.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I love the term vocational arousal. I'm going to look that up. That resonates. So I don't know if there's a way for you to kind of walk us through a process as it would now go more or less when it goes seamlessly. When, let's say you have the idea, of course, now we need to go to team bonuses or collective bonuses, and we need to make a decision around that, or maybe any other topic that you find worth discussing and then making a decision on, so that it actually becomes established. Can you give us an example for what that might be, and then how does that actually happen in a network of teams?
Yeah, so we have different decision-making bodies. So a lot of let's say we need to make a decision on kind of a methodology that's going to be used, or how a methodology is going to be applied to one of our projects. Those kind of decisions are all made by the people working on those problems. So that's a problem I'll never hear about, because it's the people who are working on them who make them. And we kind of trust that those decisions are made within those teams. And then the idea is that if people aren't sure, then they can seek out other input. And we kind of call that the advice process. And then in other bodies, we have the coordinator circle. And those are people who are really focused on our internal operations, our short-term priorities. And again, they are vested with that responsibility. And what happens is, let's say we want to use a new way to do our time allocation. This team would come up with a proposal. Because it would impact everybody, we would share it on our communication channels and give people an opportunity to object, respond. We would meet those objections, and then it would move to experimental implementation for a certain period of time where we review. And that's kind of where that delegation process happens. Then we have this other body, and we try to limit these groups to no more than 8 people, where we focus on priorities, longer term priorities and goal setting. And this is another interesting place where we look at what maybe we have several initiatives that require the same people to work on, and they have no time. So then we negotiate priority level. We negotiate resource allocation. Let's say 2 teams want to hire someone. Let's have a discussion here, and maybe not everybody agrees, but can we move forward with it based upon all the information that we know? And if there isn't agreement, that moves to the steering team, which is the small body that includes the CEO, the chief science officer, and myself. And what we do is really set minimal structure, minimal organizational boundaries of this is kind of how it can work. Let's implement it together as a team. But if things really need to be escalated, if we need to go through a separation process, if there's deadlock, if there's an organizational breakdown, those are problems that we would help solve with other teams. So it's kind of just knowing where to go with the decision or with the problem. And a lot of what I've done, especially since taking the Corporate Rebels masterclass, is when people come to me with ideas, I say, write it down and put it in a public channel. That is the most important thing you can do, is let people work with your idea as it is written. And that's been, it's so simple, but it's been such a game changer, because people write it down and then you see it all happening in the public channel. And I've become kind of a nuisance, but a lovable nuisance, where I just say no more direct messages. Put your thinking, put your conversation in a public channel so people can follow your thinking, because that is what grows sort of the hive mind of the organization. And so I think knowing where to go with a decision is really important. Knowing how to bring your idea to life through writing it down and seeking interaction with it, and being transparent about that. I would say those are kind of three things that we've really leaned on in our decision making as we've made this transition.
Okay, wonderful. And so you have a communication channel, and did I understand correctly? That's not just to create transparency, but that you also use that for gathering the objections and then integrating the objections. And is the decision also made there?
The decision may be, sometimes if the decision requires more conversation, then it can be made in one of our touch points, but then shared out publicly for interaction. But yes, that's where the decisions take place, either through kind of polls on our public channels, and or it's a proposal, it's discussed, and then it's communicated.
Okay. Yeah, so that what you just shared is such a simple yet profound change. Write it down and make it public. No more one-on-one conversations, which can also lead to more toxic communication if it's kind of staying underground, kind of. So I can totally confirm that I do that in the live workshops, naming the topics so that we actually, what I like to call navigating via tension. Wherever you see tension is an opportunity for us to see if we can optimize something, change something, et cetera, et cetera. And sharing it with the rest shows so much in terms of the system putting the spotlight on itself and understanding itself, not on a singular level or just a team level, but much larger systemic and systems level, right? So there's so many advantages to doing what you just did that, we could probably talk about and write a book about if it's not already there. So that's huge. It's a small little thing with a great impact. So when I looked at and I'm looking at it again now, actually, at your testimonial that initiated this idea to have you here in the interview, I read, you ran workshops, and you've mentioned this already, but maybe you can help us a little bit more, even diving deeper there, that you ran workshops on the psychology of change. You led trainings for reps, representatives, that's a role, the coordinators, that's a role you mentioned, facilitators and note takers, for example. So you kind of had an idea, I suppose, that these were potentially the roles that you needed to introduce and then invite people to take. Tell us a little bit about the training, and then also how people got to choose or got mandated or voted into taking those roles.
Yeah. So this was based on the structure of the 𝗟 group, which is in Spain, and this is a structure that they utilize, and it made sense to me for our organization to kind of follow in this structure. And I would say the lowest hanging fruit for me was the facilitator training, which is the most fun. I love bringing people together, energizing the team. That's what brings me a lot of personal energy. And so we knew that we needed people to hold a few different elements according to their teams. And so the element of one, with the representative, what are the goals of this group for this quarter? How are we negotiating priorities? And so that training, the reps were really about understanding, like, how can we simply approach this work? Because we started out and it was like we had so many goals for the quarter, and then people just didn't feel like they were succeeding. They didn't mean anything. So we did a lot of training on like non-traditional ways of being strategic, because it wasn't about writing a 5-year plan. It wasn't even about writing a quarterly plan, because we're a startup. We're in a complicated space, the voluntary carbon market. Things are changing all the time, weekly. We are getting different signals from clients on a weekly basis about where to put our development that scientists have to work on, that these compliance experts have to work on. So it was like, how do we keep it really simple with the representatives? And what another piece that to bring in that I don't want to forget about is the importance of the tools that you use in a decentralized company. And this was something that, like, when we were in that phase 1 free-for-all, and we had people on the team who were like, everybody should determine what tools they want to use. It's like, sometimes you just have to have these organizational boundaries, which is why we have the steering team, which is like, no, we are using one project management tool. We are using one tool that tracks our goals, and this is how we use it, because that's what gives the entire team the transparency of what we're doing. And so with the reps, that was that training of like, how do we have strategy where the priorities are clear and we're flexible enough to change and adapt quickly, and we have the skills to negotiate and have right proposals for different opportunities that we see. So that was like the training for the representatives and the technology. Here's how we use this tool. For the coordinators, that was more about delegation. How do we we're a very lovely, harmonious culture. So it was like, how do we actually interrupt someone and say, hey, we're going off task? How do we make sure that we're, giving each other solid feedback in terms of time? How are we making sure if people are taking time off, they're doing a proper handoff of their work? That really became the bottleneck clinic of the organization. And this was really trial and error, because I think some people wanted this role, but then realized they didn't, because some people like it, and this is for like people who really kind of have that eye, that zooming out on the team. How are we doing as a team? And it's like, these could easily be manager positions, but what we're trying to do is have these roles not take up more than 10% of a person's time, because they're doing a lot of key individual contributor work, and they're not getting paid extra for having the rep role or for having the coordinator role. So that means what they're doing needs to be, 1, something that excites them, 2, that doesn't take up too much of their time, but 3, has an impact. Okay, that's hard. That's a real combination you have to land. So it was trial and error, really finding the right people who were interested in efficiency gains, who kind of got the dopamine hit when we figured out how to use our project management tool better. So that became the training ground for the coordinators. And then for the facilitators, going back to that low-hanging fruit, it's hard to get a meeting right. People love a meeting, they hate a meeting. They want no meetings. They don't feel connected to anybody at the company, because we're all remote, So it was, I did multiple trainings with the facilitators, because I think that the return on investment of a good meeting is critical. And we did a lot of role playing. We taught the facilitators, how do you bring in accountability into your meeting structure? How important an agenda was? How do you co-create an agenda to figure out the most important topics? So it's just not everybody sharing updates and people gazing out or, multitasking and things like that. So that was for the facilitator, and also the facilitator sort of holding the well-being of the team. How do they organize these, what we call people meetings? Shout out to Luke Madeira, who helped us craft the people meeting structure, which is where we give each other feedback. And I can talk more about that if that's of interest. And then the note taker training, which was like, how are we transparent with the decisions we're making in our public channels? And what's a quick way to disseminate that information, especially now that we have more AI tools at our disposal. So those were sort of the trainings, the roles, and it's been an experiment, because at first we said, okay, teams, these expert teams, so all the scientists, all the project leads, all the compliance experts, the engineers, you're the expert team. So you decide who you want to be your coordinator, facilitator, note taker, rep, and you can change every quarter. And that just was quickly, it was too fast. One quarter for a new role, it was hard for people to understand, but I didn't really know what was a fair cadence or a reasonable cadence to the team. And so there's been a lot of conversation of, actually, we need the reps at least a minimum. They need to be in the role for a year so that they can really understand and move through it. And I'm thinking same with coordinators, but then some people opt in and realize, actually, this isn't for me. This isn't how my mind works. I'm not grasping it. So then it's like, okay, well, this person kind of seems like this is how they like to work. Do you want to have a conversation with them? And then, so it's been, kind of a coaching process. And I'd say that's where we are with these roles. But I think it's been quite invigorating for the team when it's the right fit. And then we'll see what happens after. I think that I've heard that kind of the maximum you'd want people in a role is 2 years. But it will depend on sort of the growth of our company and who's on the team and things like that.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that in detail. Couple of questions or one comment. When I listen to you, it just reminds me again how it's so easily neglected. That when you think about restructuring, then you focus on structure, and like I said, not so much on the culture. And I think that's what 𝗔𝗱𝗄𝗃 also is doing, expanding on the 𝗕 group's approach and really focusing as well on the mindset and the emotional intelligence, conflict resolution, etc. culture. But then also when you say, and then the invitation to say, well, if you don't think it's for you, over here is somebody that you might want to have a conversation with. This is so much what I understand Robert Keegan's idea of a deliberately developmental organization to be about. That, what we really are missing often is this opportunity for people that, work in an organization at least at 8 hours a day or whatever, let's say roughly, and then to also not just work on deliverables and outcomes and customer satisfaction and productivity, but also to really maximize and really see the opportunity of how evolution is happening as I am working here, and that this is such a great opportunity. That's one of the main reasons also I'm so interested in exploring and bringing this into the world myself. One other question I have is how much time in the beginning when somebody enters a training like that do they need to invest so that they feel like, yeah, now I'm good on my own? I mean, just a little guideline here. How much time of training?
Yeah, I would say at least 3 hours of time that I can offer, and we have recorded trainings, I think is a way to kind of dive in. But then that does require some asynchronous, just understanding our tools. They really need to kind of upskill digitally, I think, in order to hold these roles. So I would say that. And then a lot of the people who end up really kind of flying in these roles just naturally want to learn and have a growth mindset and are doing their own independent study of a concept or a tool. But I'm glad you brought up deliberately developmental organizations, because another thing that we started when we did this transformation that I didn't mention is coaching. And I do coaching calls now with everybody in the organization once a quarter, and track their evolution of how they are growing. And the coaching call is really just to reflect back to them how they're learning, what they want to learn, and small, incremental steps they want to take to grow. And I think that that's been really helpful for the team, and everybody has given positive feedback, because we don't have managers that are going to take on the personal responsibility of the growth of this individual, which I've had a lot of managers, and I can't really say any of them have fully been able to do that for me. So I don't know, but I'm sure some people feel that they have, which is great. But we really want to create the container where people feel agency around their leadership. They know how to express how they want to grow. They know how to move in that direction, and they're supported to do so. And of course, I'm only one person. I'm the back end full-time support for the organization. So there's so much that I can do, but it's really about inviting people into their own growth mindset and then supporting them, setting up internal coaching buddies that they can utilize to grow. And especially if people need support, if there's performance support, how can we create a container for people to receive training, more nuanced coaching, let's say around communication skills or things like that, where we need experts and bringing them in key moments to help support the team. So just wanted to mention that coaching piece.
Yeah. Thank you for mentioning that. I mean, what you just mentioned is, you get promoted and, then you're all of a sudden, or in a self-managed organization, like in your context, you're all of a sudden meant to love growing people, but you actually became so successful and you got here by loving solving problems, fixing problems. And how do you discover this, and I think this is a wonderful way to introduce, and that's what I do actually with my coaching program as well, now more and more often as an in-house coaching program, so that we actually can then go out and really have that coaching expertise within the organization so that it can actually be utilized and then again become more and more of a deliberately developmental organization, resources within, so wonderful. I wonder if there's also a shift, but I'm not sure that is actually, so 90% people stay and do what they've done before. So they're working in the organization, as I like to say. And now you're asking them to do up to 10% of working on the organization,
That's
right? Is that something that sometimes shifts? Like in the beginning, it's a bit more, or is it the other way around? Does it become more and more because they get, as you say, they start flying in that role?
Yeah, I would say it does shift. And when it shifts beyond kind of that 10% role, we do want to acknowledge that. And so we use an organizational map called 𝗵𝗺𝗻, and maybe they'll take on a role. Like, for instance, when we brought in our project management tool, someone on the team really had a lot of interest in that and sort of became our internal consultant on how to use this. And so that is both kind of a function of a coordinator, but this person really became kind of the owner of that. And so we had that, and it was kind of a temporary role that this person had, but we wanted to make sure that that was explicit. And it also depends on workload because, it fluctuates in terms of how many projects we have. So we do want to have flexibility, but also take into consideration people's capacity. So I like to do a lot of our coordinator meetings as workshops where we're not just discussing, we're actually doing, so that within that hour, we've done a lot. We've moved the needle on some bottlenecks, and then people can, go back and focus on their IC work and come together for the next coordinator call.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, looking at the time, we're coming to an end. And I just wonder, because like you already did in your testimonial, you want your message to reach many, many people out there, especially, I'm guessing, internal catalysts like yourself that are kind of carving out a pathway that is, uncharted territory. Because, you can learn all these things, but like yourself, you had to kind of really dig deep and really come from a passion and say, I'm going to do this, and then see what the response is. So it's an exciting path. But what would be some words of encouragement that you want to leave our audience with that you want them to hear?
Words of encouragement. Well, I think what keeps me going is that I feel that this is not just an idealistic utopian way of working. I think it's the future of labor dignity. That we're entering in a completely new phase of what work looks like, and I want this new phase to be rooted in the spirit of dignity of a job, of trust, of working hard and solving a problem through a heart-centered lens. I just think that that's how we have to be in order to shift from the dynamics of domination and control that have gotten us into this environmental mess that we're in and a lot of other messes that we're in. And I believe in the power of humanity to be able to do that. So that is what I think. I don't think it's utopian. I think it's actually just the direction we must go in. And I think it's a very exciting time because there's so much creativity. In a way, it can be daunting because there is no clear roadmap. But on the other hand, there are so many pioneers out there doing it. And so it's about learning, listening to what's resonating with you and your team, and then using these experimental opportunities to test what can happen. And there are a lot of people out there who are just meeting on their own volition to try to talk about this and change how we're doing business internally. So check out, like yourself, I mean, even offering these LinkedIn lives and elevating the voice of people who are really wanting to move the needle and being a part of these communities. There's so much generosity in these communities. There's a lot of people who deeply care. And I think that is where in times of, in weary moments, we can lean on people like that. And so I encourage you to do that. You can always reach out to me on LinkedIn. Would love to connect with you. And in my opinion, we're just like kind of modern labor activists, but in a different way. And I like kind of carrying that torch.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your words of wisdom coming from your heart. And thank you for all the work that you're doing and your generosity. Thank you for being here with us today. Thank you to our audience. And we hope you enjoyed this edition of Unbossing Leadership. And we're saying bye-bye.
Bye-bye.